This morning, the check is in the mail, not just for families, but Texas cities will soon get billions of dollars from the feds in the new COVID relief package. And a congresswoman from Texas even sweetened the deal for the state to finally expand Medicaid. Lizzie Fletcher is with us from Washington. State Senator Brian Hughes is behind bills that Texas Republicans really want passed, cleaning up the voter rolls, tightening mail-in ballots, and suing social media. But doesn't that last one conflict with tort reform? We'll ask him. Migrants flooding over the southern border again. A Texas Democrat offering help, so why isn't the Biden administration taking his call? Part of our conversation with Congressman Henry Cuellar. And chatter is picking up about Matthew McConaughey, maybe running for office in Texas. We'll look at who else is being talked about. Beto O'Rourke, Allen West, Sid Miller, and more.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. We will begin this week with some of the Texas political headlines you might have missed over the last few days. There is a gun bill getting attention in Austin, and if passed, it would let anyone with a concealed handgun license carry that firearm in public schools or inside charter schools. Senator Bob Hall, a Republican from East Texas, is behind it. Remember, state lawmakers already approved CHL holders to carry their firearms on college campuses in Texas. That happened 6 years ago. A Republican from Plano has an idea that might make a dent in the sky-high property taxes we all pay. State Rep Matt Shaheen filed a bill that would give surplus money from the state budget directly over to public schools. And in theory, that would reduce what you and I pay in our property taxes to our local districts. Remember, school taxes are more than half of our total property tax bill, and that burden only continues to grow for Texas homeowners. And relief for Texas restaurants. The stimulus bill that just passed in Congress sets aside $3 billion, more than $3 billion, for struggling restaurants nationwide. And they can tap that money for grants to stay in business. Since the pandemic started, about 1,000 Texas restaurants have closed here in the state each month. But let's start this morning with that major policy accomplishment for Democrats. It took them just 50 days since taking over Congress and the White House to pass the latest COVID relief bill. It's massive, not quite as big as the $2 trillion one that passed with bipartisan support last year, but this one still means financial support for Texans and for Texas cities. So we begin with Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher. She represents parts of West and Northwest Houston, and she spoke with us from her office in Washington. Congresswoman, it's good to see you again. We haven't had you on for about a year, which is hard to believe, but thanks for coming back. The big question everyone has right now is, when is that check going to show up in my mailbox or in my bank account?
Well, we just passed the bill Wednesday, and it's gone to the president's for the president's signature. And so hopefully that will move as quickly as possible because we know people across the country need that help. Those checks in the mailbox, the continued unemployment checks, that was the big push to get this bill passed before March 14th, and making sure that we're doing all the things that we've been able to do over the last year. There's a light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to this pandemic, but we're not quite there yet.
Well, let's break down some of this as well. You represent Houston and Harris County from, parts out to the west, the Energy Corridor, and north, and even down to Bel Air. But you mentioned that your district, Houston and Harris County, governments there are estimated to receive about $1.5 billion. What specifically is that money going to be spent on?
That's right. Well, there's a lot of flexibility in these funds, but what we have seen and heard over the last year is really the tremendous toll that this pandemic has taken on our cities and counties that really are on the front line of responding. They are the ones managing the public health response. They're the ones putting up the testing sites and now the vaccination sites. And what we have seen, and part of the intent of this bill, is to make sure that all of those operations that are essential to our daily lives continue, so that people can stay on the payroll, so that the sanitation workers can keep working, so that the permitting department can keep working. What I hear from some of my constituents is, we maybe somebody who's in construction might say, well, we have a project and we're actually ready to move, but we got to get a permit. So we don't want to stop anything that our state and local governments are doing, from pandemic response to keeping operations going, keeping people employed, keeping city services and county services moving forward. And so We also know that there's been a big dip in revenues for many of our local jurisdictions over the last year. And so these funds are intended to help address all of the issues that arise out of this COVID-19 pandemic that have affected our cities and counties.
One thing you added to this bill here was additional incentives for states like Texas that have not expanded Medicaid. Of course, Republicans who run this state have been reluctant to do that, even though plenty of other Republican states have already expanded Medicaid. If this happens, about 1 million more Texans would be covered by health insurance. But what are these incentives? And Texas obviously would still have to bite on this. What makes you think that they might now?
What we know is that about 1.4 million Texans could benefit if Texas would expand Medicaid. And so this bill provides incentives for Texas and the other states. There are about 12 states that haven't expanded Medicaid in the last decade following the Affordable Care Act. And this provides incentives to do that. And what my bill does in particular is increases the federal share for all Medicaid costs, increasing by 5%, so that there's really an incentive to get Texas to make this decision now and to help get people covered.
So it puts more money on the table for states like Texas.
That's exactly right. It puts money on the table. It increases the federal match for any new expansion state. And I hope that my colleagues in Austin will look very seriously at these incentives because, like I said, more than 1 million low-income Texans in our state would have access to health care if the legislature will expand Medicaid.
Congresswoman Fletcher, we appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
Now to Austin and the one issue that is going to consume a lot of time for state lawmakers there, the deadly power outages. 1 month after the near collapse of the Texas electric grid, the legislature is narrowing down some possible fixes, winterizing natural gas facilities and pipelines and electric power plants, reorganizing ERCOT, and a lot more than that. This is the one issue that Texans really want fixed, and Ross Ramsey is one of those watching it, the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin. Good to see you this morning, Ross.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. So Speaker Dade Phelan in the House outlined 7 bills to address this, and everything obviously still in the early stages, but are taxpayers going to be on the hook for any of this?
I think the question really is are you going to be on the hook as a taxpayer or as a ratepayer? The question is who's going to pay for winterization? If the state pays for it, it'll pay it out of tax funds. If they require the companies to do it, that'll probably come from those companies' ratepayers. Either way, the price is going to go up a little bit, and presumably electric power will be a little bit more reliable when we get out of this.
Wow. Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher told us a moment ago that Houston and Harris County are getting $1.5 billion in the COVID relief bill. You know, last summer we heard cities warning of layoffs and thin budgets. It looks like the opposite is going to happen now with this COVID relief bill.
Well, I think it's happening both at the city, county level and at the state level. You know, the state government was talking about a $4.6 billion hole in the current budget in midsummer. That outlook got better. But it looks like more than $10 billion will be going into the state treasury. So they're going to have a lot more money than they thought. And what they thought was going to be a dire situation may be more like holding the lottery ticket.
Wow. All right, Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up, migrants surging over the Texas-Mexico border, and it's likely to get worse. A Texas Democrat is offering help, so why isn't the Biden administration taking his call? We'll ask Congressman Henry Cuellar. And Texas Republicans want to clean the voter rolls and tighten up mail-in ballots and let you sue social media. Doesn't that last one, though, at least conflict with tort reform? We'll ask State Senator Brian Hughes in a moment. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Here's a face we have all seen on TV a lot over the last year. But one thing you don't often hear him discuss is Texas, specifically. Dr. Anthony Fauci spoke to one of our reporters the other day, and they talked about a lot going on here in Texas. Texas dropping the face mask requirement and letting businesses reopen at 100%. So what kind of grade would Dr. Fauci give the Texas response? His answer is on a bonus episode of Y'all-itics. We just dropped this one a few days ago. If your phone is handy, open its camera, aim it at the QR code on your screen, and it will take you directly to this conversation with Dr. Fauci. Remember, new episodes come out every Tuesday. And now to the Texas-Mexico border. There's a new surge of migrants coming across. You've probably seen this in the news over the last few days. The situation, though, is forecast to only grow worse in the coming months. Tomorrow, a group from Congress is traveling there to see it firsthand. This morning, though, some insight on what sparked this latest wave of migrants. Our next guest is Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Democrat who represents San Antonio, Laredo, and down to McAllen. Congressman Cuellar, welcome to the program. We appreciate you being here. I want to start with something you tweeted the other day. You said that our country is not prepared to handle a surge in migrants in the middle of this pandemic, and you urged the Biden administration to listen and work with border communities in Texas, like any administration should do. But you mentioned the other day in another interview that you have called the White House, you've reached out to Homeland Security, you have left messages and haven't heard back. Why are they listening to people who know the border?
I have no idea. Look, it's something that they were down there in the valley just this last weekend, and they didn't contact Congressman Vela, Congressman Gonzalez, or myself, which is very interesting. The people that are at the border should be listened to, from mayors, NGOs, Border Patrol agents that are doing this job every day. Those are the folks they ought to be listening to.
Congressman, what's causing this latest surge in migrants?
You've seen the numbers. In February, we had 100,000 people encounters. Keep in mind, that's encounters. That doesn't count 10% or maybe even more of people that are getaways. That is, the people that were not able to encounter. So the numbers are higher than the actual numbers. I can tell you that for a fact. And the other thing that we got to keep in mind is that the month of March, April, May, and June are the high peaks. Traditionally, that's way. So if we saw high numbers in February, I can tell you the numbers in March, April, May, June, May are going to be much higher.
Well, it seems like this could really spin up pretty fast into a full-blown crisis for the administration. Is President Biden taking this seriously enough, in your opinion?
President Biden gets it, but he's got other folks that work under him. And we've been offering our help to these folks. Some of us, we saw this in 2014 under President Obama. We saw this in 2019 under President Trump. So this is nothing new, except the only thing different, as you know, is the pandemic.
Congressman, Governor Abbott says he's going to deploy 500 National Guard troops down to the border. Is that politics and the governor playing to the right, or is this can this surge overwhelm the Border Patrol agents that are down there right now?
Look, and I understand what the governor's doing, but we got to look at reality. DPS, they'll go down there. They'll spend about $800 million a year on DPS. They have no immigration authority. The National Guard that they're sending down there, adding to the ones we have there already, have no immigration power. By the way, that's paid by the federal government. So they got no immigration power. Now, when they're down there, of course, I welcome them because I used to do the budget for DPS when I was at the state. My brother was a DPS officer, so they're good people. The National Guard, I support them. But it's more than just sending folks down there. Either we play defense on the 1-yard line called the U.S.-Mexico border, or we play defense on their 20-yard line. And everybody wants to play defense on the 1-yard line. And that just, as you can see, is just not working.
I'm hearing about stories from the border in which Border Patrol agents are not being vaccinated against the coronavirus. How in the world is that the case?
Absolutely. When the first vaccines came out under the Trump administration, I called the former CBP commissioner. I said, hey, do we have vaccines for our Border Patrol agents? Because the unions are calling me up and they say no. He basically said, no, we don't. I've been asking for this since October, November of last year. More Border Patrol have got their vaccines, but I think they should have been one of the first ones to have been vaccinated as been at the border.
Congressman Cuellar, we appreciate the time.
Thank you. Have a good one.
To Austin now, and the state capitol, where Texas Republicans are pushing ahead with legislation for their base. A bill filed on Friday would clean up the voter rolls and tighten up rules around mail-in ballots. State Senator Brian Hughes is behind them. He's a Republican from Mineola in East Texas, and he is the same state lawmaker who just introduced a bill that would let Texans sue social media companies if they get kicked off those platforms. Senator Hughes, thanks for the time. Let's talk about this Facebook bill, the social media bill that you introduced, Senate Bill number 12. These sites are all privately owned, as you know, and in the Senate analysis of the bill, something struck me. It said under federal law, social media sites are protected from liability. However, under the same section of federal law, it says states are expressly allowed to regulate websites so long as that those regulations are consistent with federal law. Help me read between the lines here, Senator Hughes. Is there a legal hole where this might actually apply?
Jason, that's exactly right. Section 230, the Communications Decency Act, that's the federal statute, it gives great protection, too much protection to these social media companies. But even under that law, there is a path for states to follow. Most states haven't tried it or gotten it wrong. We believe this bill threads the needle, gets us past that federal limitation, and allows us to protect Texans and protect their right to free speech. So yes, we believe this bill does it. We believe this bill is going to be the model for the nation.
Let's talk about the other side of this, what critics are talking about, because I've watched as well over the past 20 years, as Texas Republicans passed tort reform over the last 20 years or so here, trying to stop what conservatives call abusive and frivolous lawsuits. It seems like, though, if this passes, wouldn't this clog up the courts as well with people who might be upset about being kicked off a certain platform?
Jason, if this bill passes, every Texan is going to have the right to go to court and to hold Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, to hold them accountable. So you bet. And that's part of the free market. And so when Texans have the right to assert their rights, we believe these companies are going to quickly respond and stop censoring Texans' free speech.
But as far as filling up the courts with lawsuits, it seems like this one has the potential really to pack the courts with legal action.
If these social media companies continue to impose their narrow worldview and to silence Texans, you bet there's going to be a lot of cases.
On Friday, you filed an election integrity bill that does a number of things. I want you to kind of explain this and the necessity for it, Senator, because we've heard from so many state leaders who say that the elections ran fine here last November.
We still have work to do, and there's a few elements we're looking at in particular. We know from looking at the records from Department of Public Safety and also from the feds that we still have many non-citizens. Believe it or not, on Texas voter rolls, we still have people who are not citizens. You may have seen down in Harris County where the district clerk wanted to send a mail ballot application to every voter, to able-bodied voters, to voters who were there. That's not allowed in Texas, and this law is going to make that clear.
You mentioned that there are a number of non-citizens on the rolls. How many are we talking about? And are you actually talking about the state actually wiping people off the rolls?
So there are thousands, we believe. We're trying to get the final numbers, and that's part of what this bill will do. Empower the DPS to communicate with the counties to look at the records. There are procedures in place now, but they're not very tight, and in many counties, they're being ignored. So that's got to be fixed.
Senator Hughes, we appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Politico's already recruiting candidates to run in Texas next year. We'll look at some of the names you might know and what factors go into those decisions. Next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, political producer at WFAA from Dallas, is here each week as well. And Ross, I want to start with you. And Matthew McConaughey, is he really going to run? Is this serious?
He says he's really considering it. You know, in Texas, it's not, you never count anybody out until they actually say I'm not running. McConaughey's on the list. He's got celebrity. That's the first $1 million you'd spend getting your name known in Texas. See if there's anything behind it.
Bud, what's he going to run for? Governor?
Well, he's going to run for governor, but he's talking about he wants to run as a centrist. He says that he wants to be on the yellow line in the middle of the road and that he doesn't want to, push to either side. He really says whichever party will take him as a centrist. The Democrats would be foolish not to take him.
Yeah, they absolutely would be. Bernadine, there are a lot of other names out there. Allen West is one that a lot of people are talking about potentially running against Greg Abbott. What do you think about that?
I think that he should be taken seriously as well. Remember, he was not expected to win that seat as state chair. And he has run he was a congressman. So I would take him seriously now. How serious Governor Abbott will take him, we'll wait and see, but I would take Allen West very seriously.
Ross, what does that suggest, though, that the sitting Republican governor, who was once the most popular politician in the state, that he might have a primary challenger?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Republican Party has a split. I mean, the way you see this most evidently in the Pink Building here in Austin is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who's been hand in hand with Donald Trump all these years. Greg Abbott's a little bit more of an establishment character, and there's some tension there too. It really just tells you where the Republican Party is right now.
Bud, let's talk about Governor Abbott and Allen West a tad more, because they kind of had a little flare up on social media the other day.
Well, and the thing you have to remember, Governor Abbott still has that 58% approval rating, even after all this. He's still the most popular. So he's sitting on that. And he's going to show people like Allen West that they can't really give him any trouble. Allen West is promoting the Texas Republican Party on Gab, which is a social media website for people who got kicked off all the other sites. It claims to be for Christians, but Gab is for Christians the way Hitler was for Christians. It's just, it's a totally, off the wall. Everybody comments there. It's everything that ugly that can be said or thought. And so Greg Abbott had a press conference this week. And Craig Goldman and Phil King, two respected lawmakers, talking about standing up against anti-Semitism in Texas.
Bernardine, final word here, but it seems like there's still going to be a lot to play out with this.
Absolutely, and it's still early.
Yeah.
We could hear a lot more names, but I do not think that Governor Abbott is taking anyone for granted.
No, I don't think he is at all.
And the mere fact that he did address that gap shows you that.
Yeah, good point. Guys, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics. Hope you can join us then. Until then, have a great week.